We're here in Knoxville, Tennessee. This is a crawl space. It's very common for crawl spaces in this area to have issues similar to what you see here. Over time, fiberglass insulation will begin to fall. Mold doesn't necessarily grow in the insulation. What has to happen for mold to grow in the insulation is there has to be some type of dust buildup. The mold doesn't grow on the fiberglass, but you have a fiberglass insulation that's full of vacuous air spaces that seem to collect dust. And what happens is you will have mold that begins to grow on those dust collections. If you look closely here in this area where I'm shining my flashlight, you'll see a little bit of mold growth here on these floor joists. This is not one of the worst crawl spaces that I've seen, but this is pretty typical of crawl spaces in this area. We're in Knoxville, and this is a crawl space that we're inspecting for mold removal. You can see the wood is actually in really good condition. This house is roughly 40 years old. All the plumbing has been replaced with PEX. The exterior wall has been waterproofed, and there's not really a water intrusion issue in this crawl space. This is mostly a problem with humidity and condensation. Now, evaporation takes place at the same rate as condensation forms. So, as water evaporates from under this barrier, or as humid air moves in through the crawl space vents, we start seeing condensation form on the duct lines and form puddles. Now, moisture we have liquid, solid form, and turns into a vapor form, increasing the humidity in the crawl space, and collects in the insulation. The moisture collects in the insulation and will wick into the floor joist. So the floor joist essentially is a sponge sucking the water out of the insulation. So mold begins to grow. And this is very common, this spotting here on these floor joists. Let's crawl a little further into the crawl space, and you can see they've just used, this is probably a 6 mil. This is a clear poly they've placed on the ground here, which is not a great vapor barrier, but in a lot of crawl spaces this is sufficient. This is something interesting. If you look at this white powdery substance on this girder, runs from pier to pier in this crawl space. You see a white haze across the top of this girder. It's very common to find mold like this in crawl spaces in this area, mold in crawl spaces in the southeastern region, Knoxville, Chattanooga. This is very common. This is a big no-no for any crawl space. Do not store particle board in your crawl space. Thank you for watching. This is Jeremy with Mold Doctors USA here in Knoxville, Tennessee, specializing in mold removal and waterproofing.